So, what's going to be the painting that I do my own version of this time? Let's see. Chaim Soutine's portrait of Madeleine Castaing. Let's see how it goes. Chaim Soutine, one of my favourite painters, and one of the best painters the world has ever known, and I mean painter quite specifically. My interest has always been in the paint, as you may know by now, how painters use to express the image it portrays. And Soutine is the epitome of an expressive painter. This painting, a portrait of Madeleine Castaing, is a great example. Interviewed in 1986, she explained how she was recently married and was nervous sitting for Soutine. Her husband, an art critic called Madeleine Castaing, had been friends with Modigliani and sponsored many an artist at the time. But neither Madeleine nor her husband liked the painting, and they sold it a couple of months after receiving it. Well, I've been there too, painting a portrait that was not liked and not accepted. Such is the life of a portrait artist, if what you actually are is an artist, full stop. You see, a traditional portrait is not a painting really. It's a rendering of the sitter's appearance as they, or whomever is paying for it, sees them. Stray too far, paint a painting rather than a portrait, and whether or not the patrons like it is in the lap of the gods. What I usually do is talk about the painting to try and give you some insight as to how a painter sees the painting, rather than a critic or historian, someone who is learned in the history of art, assuming that means they have some insight into the painting itself rather than the ephemera that surrounds it, which all too often is in fact not the case. But the thing is, I just think this is a great painting. Everything I ever talk about when it comes to creating a work of art with paint. The paint itself is expressive, uses colour well, and composition is, well, fine. Nothing too special there, but when you paint with such expression, the composition itself is of a secondary importance. In fact, in this series of paintings that I've been doing, trying to react to or recreate this painting is particularly hard since there are no glaring omissions or problems with it that I can attempt to correct or work with to create something new. So I started out trying to abstractify it. But as you can see, that didn't work for me. I felt I was going through the motions rather than actually creating something. So I had to go back to the beginning and paint what I could see, resolving to use the image as if a photograph, in the same way that I've painted many people before, friends and family that is, rather than portraits per se. Painting is hard. Looking back at the video I made of my progress, I realised I had exactly the same problem with my last effort, Marcel Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase. I went down the rabbit hole that I had dug for myself, that of abstracting what I was looking at in my own particular way, but I felt, again, as if I was just recreating what I had done with Picasso's Child Holding a Dove. But maybe I'm wrong and I shouldn't be so bashful about it. I'm not sure. In the end, I felt there was something lacking, or rather, something a little bit too easy in painting that way. I could do it, sure, but I think all my paintings would end up looking kind of the same. Of course, that would be great for any potential gallery owner or dealer who would be confident that they could essentially sell the same painting again and again, knowing exactly what the product would look like each time, with a little variance in colours and composition, but I have learnt that that is just not me. I would get bored beyond belief, the upshot of which would be that I would stop trying, since I would already know what I was doing, and the paintings would get duller and less interesting as time went on. So I tried again and ended up with something the like of which I have done before, but not in a long time. So for me it was fresh, and I enjoyed the process, more or less, which is necessary to completing something that works. Soutine's painting is a rather wonderful demonstration of expressionism. Every brushstroke means something and says something. That is exactly what a good painting should be. The hands, I could say, are a little loose, but who cares? The whole is what matters, and in a painting like this it only adds to the overall expressive quality of the work. This is why I love Soutine so much. Expression is everything in Soutine's work, which is not flamboyant, but emotional, full of feeling, full of life. The way he paints gives the impression, in a small reproduction on the screen, of heavily layered paint, impasto to the max. This is something I always thought before I'd ever seen one in real life, although from my experience of painting there was something about it which didn't quite fit with the impasto MO. Looking at it, observing the brushstrokes and how the colours wheel and dance melding into each other, there is clearly something a little too fluid about it to just encapsulate the idea of thick paint over thick paint, which is what impasto is all about. There is some kind of liquefaction going on. When I finally saw a Soutine for the first time in real life, it was immediately plain what was happening. To say it was a revelation might be a little strong, but it certainly made me realise, at that time, that I knew more about painting, the physical act of painting I mean, than perhaps I'd given myself credit for. Because the instant I saw one, it was obvious. He used a lot of linseed oil. He could paint expressively, emotionally, with all the benefits of thick impasto, but without the painting actually being thick. His paintings are really not thick at all. The paint slides and slips across the canvas in a way that traditional old master paintings never did, never could, since they were much more considered in their application. Old masters used impasto to create specific effects. Indeed, nearly all techniques handed down were just that, techniques, ways of creating a particular effect to better express your design, which for a lot of painters is all they were doing, manifesting a design. The sobriquet Old Master denotes someone who had a special talent with those techniques, which when coupled with a painter who actually had a flair for painting itself, the emotional expressive side, which would only appear on small parts of the painting as if nothing but a detail, rendered a painting which has the life and power we associate with that term, Old Master. But come the 20th century and all the experiments that had gone on during the previous 50 years or so with the Impressionists and others, the gate was left wide open for artists to say to themselves, sod the technique and design. The only aspect that radiates power and emotion is when the paint is applied with feeling, not technique, so let's just do that. And so the likes of Soutine came and bulldozed the old masters and many, many other painters who might have been old but were certainly not masters, creating instead paintings with breathtaking expressive qualities that got to the point of what painting is really about, rendering life into an inanimate object, proving to the artist that they exist and to the viewer that someone else exists. To my mind, art is the only proof we have of that, and when demonstrated by a painter with the qualities the like of which Soutine had, it is a wonder to behold. Just think, Madeleine Castaing died at the age of 99 in 1982 when I was about 10 years old. Yet the life and vitality of Soutine's painting of her as a young woman will live on and on and on for as long as it and people to see it exist. My version is a little different. The face is nicely painted, expressive, nice brushstrokes, the hands abstracted, and a little more life is put into the background by dint of its more geometric construction, rather than just a more or less random mess of colour to offset the main subject. And the dress itself is also stylised, with the black of the fur coat that Madeleine was wearing creating a mass which does exactly the same job as in the original, that of separating and contrasting elements of the whole. My painting works, I think, extremely well, and looking at it alongside Soutine's original, it comes across as a modern version, up to date and perhaps a little more relevant. I suppose one of the problems with expressionist painting is that to the layman they can look a little unfinished. You see, things are different now to how they were back in the early 20th century. Back then the number of artists was very small. To be an artist and to put up with the poverty, degradation and people looking down on you, since an artist, a bohemian, was nothing but a bad thing. It meant that only those that felt that their lives only made sense by creating art would continue to do so. Everyone else would like the idea, usually upper middle class or those that were rich with time to spare would continue, and usually do little more than potter about with paint, creating nothing of any real quality. Occasionally you got those that did produce something worthwhile from their wealthy endeavours. Cézanne springs to mind, but on the whole a painter was someone who felt they had no choice but to paint, and so paint they did, whatever the cost. But nowadays, things are not the same, particularly since the internet came into being. I was painting before the internet and during its beginnings, and obviously continue to do so. Looking for paintings to buy online, you are met with several million possibilities. Expressionist painting has become something that is a catch-all for anyone who has no talent or technique. All you have to do is make a mess on a canvas and hey presto, you are an expressionist painter. People's attention spans are so small that spending the time looking and observing the paint to try and understand the expression being made just isn't a thing that people do. That old hackneyed expression, I don't know much about art but I know what I like, has never been more true. Art is not a thing anymore. Anyone can do it and get the acclamation they crave by spamming social media with their childish daubs, claiming a spiritual expression of this and that, with sycophants queuing up to prop up the author's fragile ego. And so simply painting a good expressionist painting is not enough today. It will drown in the quagmire of self-serving masturbatory pseudo-expression which passes for art. And so I polish things off, if you'll excuse the extended metaphor, to show how one can be expressive and skilled, honing your work to produce a carefully and confidently finished work of art that can never be accused of being just like everything else. I have done purely expressionist paintings, but that lack of finish always left me thinking there was something missing. Times have moved on, and expression needs to be more defined, more finished. You're expressing something? Well, don't just rant and rave, screaming your agonies with a cack-handed flourish of colour and brush. Say it, then refine it, and make it readable and clear. The point of expression is not just to express for oneself, as I said, that is nothing but pleasuring oneself. The point is to express it so that those other than yourself can understand it and get something from it. After all, expression in the end is no good unless it brings others in. Expressing to no one but yourself is just pointless. For an artist, without others to see, understand and take part in what you have created, what's the bloody point? Which perhaps is why the early abstracted incarnations haven't worked for me in this and the last painting, since that particular way of painting works for me, but I'm not sure it says anything to anyone else. Somehow, I feel it loses the content from the original, and I am left with nothing more than a personal fantasy of art, which ironically is exactly what art is not. Maybe the next painting will be different. We'll see.